Our guest for the hour, three-time Academy Award-winning director, producer, screenwriter Oliver Stone did Born on the 4th of July and Platoon and Wall Street and Salvador and JFK, as well as a 10-part series for Showtime called The Untold History of the United States, now out in DVD form with 2 extra chapters. Our guest also, Peter Kuznick, who co-wrote the book and co-authored the series, history professor at American University. Peter Kuznick, what this next chapter looks like today, what we are experiencing today in the United States.
It's a continuation of the trends that Oliver and I were talking about from the 1890s up to the present. We had a lot of hope for Obama when he was elected in 2008. I guess we were somewhat naive because Obama, rather than breaking with the patterns of American empire and American militarism, has continued most of them. Ari Fleischer, Bush's press secretary, said that this is actually George W. Bush's 4th term that we're experiencing now. And in some ways, that's true, and disappointingly so. Obama, from the beginning, surrounded himself with very, very conservative advisors. His economic team was considered, the New York Times called them a constellation of Reubenites, followers of Robert Reuben. His military team, his defense policy, foreign policy, were mostly hawks. People like Hillary Clinton, Robert Gates, General Jones, and his policies have reflected that. Oliver and I see him as simply a more efficient manager of the American empire, not somebody who's breaking with the empire. He doesn't even think in different terms. For example, he recently called for a 13-year commemoration of the Vietnam War, in which we're going to reposition our understanding of the Vietnam War. And that's very, very dangerous. A recent poll showed that 51% of 18 to 29-year-olds now think that the Vietnam War was worth fighting, see the Vietnam War as an American interest. Those people our age, about 70%, say the Vietnam War was a mistake or even worse. But the fact that younger people are not learning history and are seeing the Vietnam War in more positive light is symptomatic of what Oliver and I are concerned about, that people's understanding of history is distorted in such a way as to perpetuate the trends that we find very, very objectionable.
Oliver Stone, talk about this next project that you are involved with.
Well, I've been writing a screenplay for the Martin Luther King story with the cooperation of the estate. I can't say for sure it's going to happen. I really hope so. Jamie Foxx is very interested, and I worked with Jamie before, and I think he can do a hell of a job as King. I want to tell a story about a man who was a great American. I think, he was our Gandhi. He was as close as I know to American Gandhi, and believed in nonviolence, but a strong nonviolence, resistant. He spoke out not only for civil rights, but when he crossed over and he spoke out against militarism and greed and the Vietnam War, he made many more enemies. And he became a very strong and important character because he was merging this huge civil rights movement with the anti-Vietnam movement. He pointed out very clearly that colored soldiers were fighting in disproportionate numbers in Vietnam and killing colored people over there, whereas they could not get decent treatment or education at home. He made that famous quote, remember, about spending $320,000 to kill every single Vietnam soldier. That's what it cost us, and we were spending $50 at home for anybody who was poor. And he was saying, this is crazy, and a nation that has these priorities is doomed to a spiritual death.
So you had King dealing with Kennedy 50 years ago in the 1963 March on Washington, and then moving on to deal with LBJ to get the Voting Rights and the Civil Rights Act passed.
Right. Yeah, a lot, and I think we have to give not much credit is always given to Kennedy, but his death did motivate a lot of that feeling that we had to pass that the Civil Rights Act and then the Voting Rights Act. But King fought for it, and Johnson, that was his best side. Johnson did, we have to give him credit for backing him on that.
Sadly, it was U.S. Attorney General Robert Kennedy who ultimately approved a wiretap on Dr. King. Maybe we can take that from that moment decades ago to what we're seeing today, not just on leading dissident figures, but on all Americans, and it looks like on most world leaders, enemy or ally.
Well, you have to say pre-Robert Kennedy, J. Edgar Hoover of the FBI had been very interested in civil rights leaders going back to the 1930s. He bugged them, and he always thought that the civil rights movement was controlled by Moscow, and he thought the Vietnam students who were protesting against the war were controlled by Moscow. He had informants in all these groups. Hoover represents this. By the way, Hoover goes back to 1919, Woodrow Wilson era, and he was involved in the Palmer raids. He believed that we deported many leftists in 1919,
including Emma Goldman and
including
others.
Emma Goldman and Big Bill Haywood. And it was, you know, we've always had a fear of communism that was disproportionate to what their real threat to us was. And before the revolution, by the way, the property classes always feared labor.
And so what has replaced that now? This term national security that justifies the mass surveillance of Americans and people all over the world. This is under President Obama.
Absolutely. Well, this is an old issue, too. Historically, terrorists, you know, Harry Truman, in 1947, the Truman Doctrine, he declared boldly on the floor of Congress that we had to invest $400 million in Greece and Turkey to defeat outside forces. He included terrorists and communists as destabilizing Greece. These are the people, by the way, who fought for the independence of Greece against the Nazis. They became terrorists right away. So the word terrorist has been used very loosely to describe whatever enemy. If you read George Orwell, 1984, the government exists, it's justified because of terrorists. There are always terrorists in the woodwork. Yes, there are terrorists in the war. They are vile. We should track them down ad hoc, selectively, specifically. Glenn Greenwald has been very articulate about this. You know somebody or has connections to terrorism, I think most people would back that. But when you put the whole thing out over the web and you say everybody in the world is our potentially suspect, you're making a different kind of world. You're making that horrible world that George Bush described when he said you're either with us or you're against us. I don't want to live in that world.
But either way, you're being surveilled.
Either way, yeah. You have to prove you're innocent, so to speak.
So
I worry about my children about that, and I worry about the future, because Obama, as Peter said, is an intelligent manager. I don't believe he's an unreasonable man. I don't even think he knows exactly what's going on. But I do fear a situation where if we have another terrorist attack, what's going to happen? And then what if we have another Bush as a president or a right-winger? You know, the technology in place.
Would it be very different? As Ari Fleischman said, the spokesperson for President Bush, President Obama, as Ari Fleischer says, the former spokesperson for President George W. Bush, President Obama is a continuation of what President Bush was doing.
Obama doesn't have, you know, when I said about vision earlier, about Roosevelt and Kennedy and Wallace, these are bigger men. I mean, I don't think Obama was given a mandate in 2008. He could have done something. He could have been a Roosevelt. People were comparing him to Roosevelt at that time. He didn't run with it. He hired, as Peter said, he put Clinton in it, he put Gates in, the economic team from Rubin. I don't get it. Why didn't he take his moment? He blew it. And by doing that, because so many people campaigned for him, and he disbanded that organization. That was a grassroots organization. He disbanded. He took the hope away from those people who believed that democracy was still possible. You call the show Democracy Now? I was thinking about that should be a question mark. You know, you have an exclamation point.
Would you consider making a film about Edward Snowden?
I think it'd be a terrific subject, frankly. I don't know that I can handle it because there's so much incoming news. I think Snowden's been very smart, and he's done the best he can under most difficult circumstances.